Hello and welcome to the next session on the topic of resources and energy resource management. This session is meeting increasing energy demand. So there is your title and learning objectives, and by the end of this session you should know how and why the demand for and supply of energy has changed, and also the ways in which we are meeting that increased demand. So get today's title and learning objectives written down, and when you're ready, unpause the screen and we'll get cracking on. So we're going to start by addressing why the global demand for energy is going up. Why are we using and requiring much more energy than we used to? And there are some obvious reasons to this, and I want you to think about those reasons firsthand, because common sense works well in specifically human geography, but actually elsewhere as well. And often the reasons that are given are just pretty logical. I'm going to summarize it for you in a spider diagram, but just have a little think, just pause the screen, maybe have 30 seconds to see if you can name any specific reasons why you think we might be requiring more energy now than we've ever done, and why in the future we're likely to require a bit more energy. Okay, hopefully you've had a thought about that. And maybe you've even come up with some of the reasons why. So we're going to do this. We're going to you can do this however you want. I've chosen to use a spider diagram, but it's quite a big one, so you may want to do that over a double page, or you might just want to use subheadings for the three reasons that we're going to outline today. So the very first aspect, the very first reason which I want to highlight to you about why energy demand is going up is pretty obvious, I think. It's because there's more of us than ever before. Population growth. The world is getting bigger, and I've got some stats here on the slide you can see. So world population is increasing, and it will continue to increase. They think by 2050 it could be 9.6, maybe even some projections saying up to 10 billion people. Now when it is currently around the 7.5 billion mark, that's another increase of about 50% on top of that. So that's huge numbers we're talking about. And all of those extra people are going to need energy, because we all use energy in some form or another. Energy is used to create the products that we use. Energy is used to create the food that we eat. Sometimes we directly use energy from electricity supply in the wall when we're charging our phones or using our TVs. So population and the growth of population will increase energy demand without any shadow of a doubt. So what you need to do is you need to jot down rapid population growth as one of the reasons why global demand for energy is increasing. Pause the screen while you're doing that. When you're ready, unpause the screen and I'll put the next reason up for you. Okay, so rapid population growth is one, and I would argue the most significant factor when it comes to looking at global energy demand increasing. The reason I say significant factor, I'll get to in a second, okay, because this information you might want to apply or practice in an 8-mark scenario. So the second factor that really is leading to our increased demand for energy is the fact that we're getting wealthier, okay? The posh way of saying we're getting wealthier is by saying the affluence is rising. We're getting more affluent. Affluence is wealth. So rising wealth really is something which is leading to us buying more stuff. And I've already established in the first section, the population growth section, that the more stuff we buy, the energy that goes into making that stuff obviously has to increase as well. And a lot of the stuff that we buy is electrical goods, electrical items, or items that make our life more convenient. So a dishwasher, for example, or a TV maybe doesn't make it more convenient, but certainly entertains us a little bit. Games consoles, all those sorts of things. And that is as a result of us having more money to spend. Those of us that have more money to spend sometimes spend it on going on holiday, and one of the most energy inefficient things that drain on energy, things like, for example, oil through the jet fuel is going on holiday. Taking a flight anywhere utilizes huge amounts of energy, billions and billions of tons of energy being absorbed or utilized, just for us to go on holiday. But we do, because we're wealthy or able to. So as countries like China and India and all the other BRIC nations are becoming wealthier, and the people within those countries are becoming wealthier, they've got more individual or personal wealth, so do the demands for the things that they want to buy. And so that rising affluence is increasing our demand for energy. So again, get the information down, get the notes down. Once you're ready, unpause the screen and I'll give you the third main factor for reasons why global demand for energy is increasing. Okay, so the last thing and the last point I'm going to raise, it's not by any means the only thing, but technological advances, they are another reason really that's playing into us demanding more energy. Now, you can look at this a couple of ways. The first way is that we've got more demand for energy because technology is now such a big part of our lives. We're not satisfied just kicking a ball around the park. We want to do it virtually on an Xbox. We're not satisfied with a, I don't know, standard telephone box to ring up our mates and have conversations, and we want to use our mobile phones and all the social media platforms that comes with that. So technological advances and the availability of technology mass scale. Before, the people that had mobile phones back in the day of the 80s had to carry the backpack with it, that went along with powering it, and had a big aerial cable and all that sort of stuff that went alongside it, and very few people had them. But mobile phones now, everyone's got them because it's more available. The technology has become affordable, it's become cheaper. And so as technology has advanced, we're able to afford more of it. So that's one way that tech affects the demand for energy. The second way, and this is one way you may not have thought about, is that we're getting better at accessing energy. Now, what I mean is, yes, we're developing things like renewables, and that makes sense, but we are also getting better at accessing formerly not very available fossil fuels. I'll give you the example of Brazil. Brazil have spent a long time trying to access a massive reservoir of oil just off their east coast, which is underneath the ocean, then underneath like a salt crust. And previously it was thought very, very difficult, or too difficult, not worth bothering with. But technology has advanced so much that actually Brazil are now churning out billions of barrels of oil from this source of oil that people thought was inaccessible before. So as a result of that, we are now able to kind of utilize that oil, and the demand for that oil is still there, so energy is again increasing, and our use of energy is increasing. So you've got three things here, and I mentioned earlier on about this idea about being significant, and I said that rapid population growth was the most significant aspect or reason why our demand for energy is increasing. And I think that population growth is because even if one person doesn't use much energy, at least any more people are using some. If you add that by 2 point however many billion are going to be added, it's going to add up to a great number of people. And some of those people in the populations are going to be born into countries where there is a lot of personal wealth, and therefore that's going to have kind of double bubble effect. So rapid population growth, I think, is probably the most significant factor. But the reason I'm talking about that specifically is because you might want to think of this in an 8-mark question term. So when we look at how or which is the most significant factor, we are talking about assess questions. And you will have an 8-mark assess or evaluate question at the end of this topic. So anytime you are going over content in lessons or at home revising stuff, just bear in mind, have in the back of your mind, how could this be given as an 8-mark question? How could I be assessed on this, or how could I evaluate this? If it's something which has advantages and disadvantages, you can easily think of, right, that could be an evaluate question easily. But something like this, where I've given you 3 reasons for global demand for energy increasing, you could easily ask the question, assess the reasons that global demand for energy is increasing. And one of your paragraphs might be population growth, one of them might be rising affluence, and in your conclusion, you may want to talk about how population growth is the most significant aspect. So this is just more of exam advice, really, and while you're revising your notes, just think and devise your own exam questions if you want, but think, how could I be asked this in the worst case scenario? Because 8-mark questions are often the worst case scenario. So make sure you've got all these notes written down, and now we've looked at the reasons why global demand for energy is increasing. We're now going to start to look at the kind of meat and veg of this particular lesson, which is looking at what we are doing to meet that increasing demand. So, how are we meeting demand? Well, firstly, we are utilising more different energy sources than ever before, and the last lesson we did, lesson 6 on the energy mix, shows you with a wealthy country like the UK just how many different sources of energy or types of energy we utilise. We've got the wind power, we've got solar, we've got hydro, we've got nuclear, etc., etc. But in this lesson, you're going to be looking at 3 renewable and 3 non-renewable types of energy generation. Now, what I want you to do with each of them is I'd like you to summarise them. Okay, I want you to research them and summarise them, and this takes a while. Now in class, I get pupils to do one in a group, and then we add it together as a big PowerPoint at the end, or a big table at the end. As you're doing this from home, you're going to need to do it all by your lonesome, which means that you're going to have to dedicate time to it. Hence why this lesson really should take you, at least another full hour's session if you're going to do it properly. So what your research needs to include is background information, and I'll tell you what you're researching in a moment. Background information, so what is that type of energy, how does it work, what is wind power, how does it work? A specific located example, again I will give you those. Positives of that type of energy for people, specifically positives for people. Positives for the environment. Negatives for people. And negatives for the environment. So you've got 6 different things that I would like you to cover when it comes to researching these different types of energy source. Now I'm going to give you the specific located example for you to then go away and research, and I'm also going to provide you with the name of the type of energy I want you to look at, and then hopefully you will be able to do your own research to summarize these different types of energy in a table. Now how this is going to be useful to you, and if you've got access, by the way, to the Highland Cal textbook, it's pages 240 to 245. How this is useful to you is not only is it going to give you a really good overview about 6 different types of energy, so renewable and non-renewable, which is also going to include coal and wind, which we've already looked at, remember, which is, the exam board require you to know in detail at least one renewable and at least one non-renewable type of energy. You're going to help cement that, so repeat over those a little bit, but you're also going to have case study examples implemented. And this is going to be really, really useful just for your overall knowledge of renewable and non-renewable technologies. So you may want to put it into a table format of some description, and I've got a suggestion as to what table format you could use. If you are feeling lazy, and hopefully those of you have already paused the screen and started doing this won't feel too cheated. If you're feeling lazy, there is actually the full table on the next slide or two. So I would urge you to do it yourself. It's more important that you filter the information, because whenever I put something together, it's full of typos. You can see how I've spelt research there is a good example of that, research. But also, it's more detailed than you probably would need to have for an exam. Because I don't like to miss out any detail, and just in case one particular stat resonates with you. So I'd like you to do it because it will be more useful to you, and it will help cement that knowledge into your brain more readily. Okay, but when you're ready, you can unpause the screen and I'll give you a summary of all the 6 different types. And before that, obviously, you need to know what you're researching and the example. So here we go on the next slide. The renewable energy, I'd like you to use wind, and a case study you can use is the London Array in the UK. There's loads of detail about that. And there's a link there. I don't know how you're going to type that in, but you can see that the London Array was at one stage, I don't know if it still is, the world's largest offshore wind farm. So there's lots of interesting stats and facts and figures you might want to get about that. One of the other renewable types of energy sources is hydroelectric power, and I'd like you to look at the Three Gorges Dam in China for that, please. And again, a nice Guardian article from 2011 for you to use if you need to. And then in solar power, I'd like you to look at the Ivanpah solar electric generating system in the Mojave Desert in the USA. You can use other ones, but again, these are the ones I've already found a decent article. Right, non-renewable energy sources, I'd like you to look at oil reserves, so the Athabasca tar sands in Canada. And again, a nice resource for you to use. Nuclear energy, I'd like you to look at the Kashiwazaki Kariwa plant in Japan. But again, that's not the only one you could look at. You could look at other ones, you could look at UK examples. And natural gas. Now, the natural gas quadrilla site, we're going to look at more detail in a bit. Okay, so that's kind of the end of this lesson, or the start of the next lesson. We're going to look at more detail about fracking, because the exam board like to look at fracking separately as well, and so we will do it separately as well. But this is the 6 different types of energy that I would like you to research and complete a summary table about. Remember those 6 areas. I want background, what are they, how do they work? I want advantages for, an example, which I've given you here. I want advantages for people, disadvantages for people, advantages for the environment, disadvantages for the environment. Okay, and if you're not sure, go back a bit in the video and you'll see the page with those different sections on it. Pause the screen, Spend a good 45 minutes to an hour doing that, please, because this lesson really is more than one lesson. It's really two, and it's listed as such on the menu page of the YouTube channel. So make sure you do put the hours in for this to make it worthwhile. When you're ready, unpause the screen because lesson 2 follows next. Okay, so this is effectively lesson 2, time-wise, of the task where we're looking at meeting increasing energy demand. So last session, which was within this same video, in the last session we looked at reasons why energy demand is going up. So we looked at rising affluence, we looked at population increase, and we looked at technological advances. But we also had a research task where you had to look at 6 different types of energy and identify background information about them, an example, and positives for people in the environment, negatives for people in the environment. What I've got on the screen here is for those of you that want to check your work or want to make sure you've got the gist of it. I have got those for you on here. So these are our non-renewable energy sources. You've got oil reserves and the Athabasca tar sands in Canada referenced, nuclear energy and natural gas. And so for each of these, if you want to do a screenshot of this and then copy and paste it, make sure you print it, make sure it's in your notes, and again, highlight it, go over it, read it. For every single one, I've done as many different bullet points as I possibly can to try and give you just every potential option for maybe an evaluate question in an exam. So once you've done that, I'm going to show you the renewable slide as well. So pause the screen if you want to, like say, screenshot or copy or check still and have more time. But here's the next one. So you've got your example of wind energy, hydroelectric power and solar power there with the examples that I've given you. And again, advantages and disadvantages for people in the environment for all of those examples. Okay, so again, if you want to do a screenshot, please do a screenshot. If you want to check your notes, no problem. If you want to add to them, also no problem. Just make sure you've got a good detailed chunk of notes ready for any kind of exam scenario. Now, this isn't it, okay? This is just a recap of the last lesson about what you should have. This session, there's kind of one more aspect that I really want to look at in proper depth, and that is the idea of fracking. For those of you that want a bit of an extension, however, this YouTube link, and I don't know if I've saved this video or not, Jog Vlogs, the folder of 365. If not, it's worth a watch. This is like a sort of a 5 to 10 minute TED animation, which really essentially identifies whether renewable energy is going to be enough, whether we can rely on renewable energy to power the world, and what needs to be in place in order for that to happen. So it's definitely something that I would say I'd urge you to watch, because it does just give you good indications as to how realistic it is that renewable energy is the future in the medium and short term, as well as whether it's a long term. It seems to be the general consensus that long term it's a good thing, but can renewable energy alone meet the demand that we are facing with regards to energy, and can it cope with another 2.5 billion people? And that's a question that people will hopefully answer, or will have to, in the next 30 to 50 years. So that's a bit of extension work for you. But now I want you to look at fracking. So I'd use this as a separate title, and it says click on the image for a video about fracking. I can't do that through this PowerPoint, so the video that's saved onto the Jog Vlogs folder of 365, definitely worth watching. But you need to know what fracking is. First and foremost, what is fracking? The task you've done already about natural gas tells you about fracking a little bit, but I want you to really put a separate section on it. The exam would love looking at fracking. So identify what fracking is, either if you can find the video or just do a bit of a Google search now. When you've done a little bit of research about what fracking is, then you can carry on by doing research about this. So I want a detailed summary. Fracking facts. Okay, these facts are not just for fun, although they are really fun. They are to help give you specific detail, because again, this is one of the areas where the exam board might shove it in an 8-mark question. They might say evaluate the use of fracking to meet energy need. Okay, that could be an exam question. So you would then have to talk about, well, fracking is this, one of the good things about fracking is this, one of the bad things about fracking is this. But if you've got some facts, you can use them for your specific detail. So you can say one of the positives of fracking is it provides jobs. For example, in Lancashire, with in the Quadrilla site, provided jobs for, I don't know, 80 people in an area of high unemployment. That's the kind of thing where you can tie in these facts and fracking facts into your answers, into your work. So I want positives of fracking. Again, if you can extend those positives, great, and negatives of fracking too. So really specifically to do with fracking, which I know you've done a little bit about in the summary, but I want you just to go over it again. If you've got access to the textbook, pages 244 and 245, but you will find so many videos about fracking and about the positives and negatives of fracking on YouTube if you want to search them. My only advice is just be careful of the source, because there's a lot of debate about fracking. It's a very, very divisive issue, and if your source is someone that's anti-fracking, then they're only going to really embellish the negatives. They're not going to talk much about the positives. So try and find a balanced article, one that gives you both sides of the argument fairly, and don't believe everything you watch or read either. So there's lots of controversial things around fracking, some of which are true, some of which are less true. So just be careful of your source, please. Now, once you've done that, there is one final thing that, again, if you want to do another lesson for it, because this is potentially up to 3 lessons, and I would say that these 4 kind of questions are a really good revision activity. Now, these are ways in which just today's lesson alone, and I've mentioned this previously, could be used in an 8-mark exam scenario. And I've said as well in the first half of the lesson, so the one where we looked at energy demand, I talked to you a lot about how thinking of the content that you're writing down in your notes as an 8-marker really helps focus how you could present that information to an examiner. Now, I've got 4 possible, completely made up, but 4 possible exam type questions that are 8 markers. And you can either pick one and try it, or you can pick none and try it, I don't care. If you want to save them, write them down for maybe when you are doing revision of this topic. I would strongly suggest it, because the more practice you do at these, the more you can rattle them out in exam scenarios with very little time. Okay, so there are 4 here. One of them says, assess the reasons for increasing global energy demand. Now, I kind of already talked about that. If you want to go back to the start, close to the start of this video, I did already say, I would say that, if I'm looking at population increase and rising affluence, let's take those 2, then I could do 1 paragraph on that, on population increase, 1 paragraph on rising affluence, make sure I give a stat, a fact, a figure. There's lots in your notes now, there should be, and then in my conclusion, I'm going to say which is the most significant. Which is always the case for assess questions. Look, you can see assess means make an informed judgment, identify a range of aspects, so population increase, wealth, and say which is the most significant in your opinion and why. So i.e. the most significant reason for an increase in global demand is population increase. This is because. Okay, there you go, there's your conclusion. Assess the impacts on people of developing non-renewable and renewable energy resources. So this one requires you to look at your table that you've been doing. So I want you to focus on the impacts of people. Can be positive and negative, should be both, but you need to talk about at least one non-renewable energy source and at least one renewable energy source. So you might want to say one non-renewable energy source is oil, and this has a positive impact on people because, and then talk about jobs. Another, you could say this has a negative impact on people, however, because, and then you give that negative impact, and then give a stat, something from the Athabasca tar sands case study. And then your second paragraph could be, however, renewable energy developing could include wind, which has good, bad, whatever. So impacts on people, non-renewable, renewable, making sure you're ticking the boxes. And then your conclusion is assessing, tell me which is the most significant impact on people. Are the positive impacts of developing non-renewable more significant and better than the negative impacts maybe of developing renewable energy, or whatever it might be? Okay, you come up with which you think is the most significant and why. Very similar question, assess the impacts on the environment of developing non-renewable and renewable. And again, all of the notes you've taken this lesson can be applied to these examples. And I'll chuck in an evaluate one for you because we know we look at advantages and disadvantages. So you could say evaluate renewable energy as the future of energy production. So you could just focus on renewables only, and then you could talk about the good parts of renewables and the bad parts. This, if you watch that little video link that I mentioned earlier in this session, that will help inform you and answer this question maybe with a bit more confidence. I could add another one on here. This shouldn't stop you from thinking about up your own. You could say evaluate fracking as a way to help secure the energy production in the UK. All right, and that would be a really specific evaluate type question, just to get you to structure and practice structuring those sorts of questions. Okay, if you are unsure of where to start and how to structure it, because this is the first topic you've looked at, get onto the GCSE revision playlist and look at the 8 markers made easy section. Look for assess and evaluate questions. They're all on there. There's examine, assess, evaluate, and also if you want to follow that up, how to write a good conclusion is a separate video which talks you about creating a conclusion which is the same size paragraph as your main body of information paragraphs, but it's a very important part of 8 mark questions, assess and evaluate ones, that you conclude. So make sure you can get the conclusions right as well. Okay, look, this has been a mammoth session, and it's a mammoth session because you've done a lot of the work. Although it's only half an hour long in terms of me recording it, it's very significant when it comes to actually you doing the work. There's loads of exam practice in this. There's loads of self-research you've done in this too, and there's loads of stats, facts and figures to go through. Really, it's 3 lessons worth of work. So I really want to impress upon you that if this is taking you half an hour, just the time it's taken to do the video, then you're not really doing it right and you're not doing it justice. I would certainly spend a good 45 minutes on this particular slide, because this will make sure that you know the notes. This will give you a chance to review the notes you've taken over this last 2 hours. Really important that you do that, but also it gives you that exam practice which you can never have enough of. Alright, I'll shut up now. Thank you very much for listening. I will see you next time for another jog vlog, and well done for getting through it.